doing a wonderful job of making sure that we stay in touch and bringing new people onto campus. We really value our international. I think it's very healthy for our commitment.
Let me take this opportunity to welcome all of you, especially our honored guest, His Excellency Ambassador Shankar Sharma, Ambassador of Nepal to the United States of America. Welcome to our campus, Cal State University, Long Beach. I will get to Ambassador's introduction in a minute, but let me take this opportunity to introduce, for the benefit of the Ambassador, a little bit about California State University system, as well as California State University, Long Beach. The California State University system is one of the largest, probably the largest public university system in the country, with 23 different independent universities throughout the state, starting from Humboldt up north to San Diego to the south. It is spread in the coastline, in the central coast to the mountain regions. So it serves, as I said, almost 500,000 students in the state of California. And California State University Long Beach is the largest campus in the system, with about 35, 36, they might correct me because the numbers keep changing. At a point, we were about 36,000 students on this campus. And there are 8 different colleges in this university. It's a comprehensive university with over 300 different majors. And one of the colleges that is very unique is the College of Continuing and Professional Education, also home to the Center for International Education. College of Continuing and Professional Education is celebrating its 40th year this year. So we've been in existence for 40 years, working with business, industry, the community, and mostly non-traditional students. And the College of Continuing and Professional Education has always had an international focus, but with Center for International Education added, our reach has really reached to globally, to all corners of the world. And international education is a priority, a focus of this university. We have a commitment to educate our students with international exposure, international curriculum, and international opportunities. So we are committed to that. And I mention this especially because Nepal has been, for the last few years, in the top 10 of the foreign student, origin of foreign students in this country. As small as the country is, it is second to India in South Asia region to send international students to this country, some 12,000, 13,000 students every year. So it is quite significant that we have the ambassador from Nepal present in our campus today. And to that end, we've just, for your benefit, Your Excellency, I would like to show you a short video that kind of captures the university. It is intended for recruitment to international students, but all I did today was I had 10 minutes to drive him around. I went through Atherton and then to Beach Drive and then came down here. So he doesn't have much chance to see the university, but there are some pictures in this video that will give you a sense of the university. So let's roll the video, and then after that we'll get on the program.
Cool ocean breezes, beautiful sunny skies, a coastal city known for its seaport, tourism, and entertainment. A beautiful garden campus known for its diverse, friendly, and scholarly students. A city called Long Beach, and a campus named California State University Long Beach, home to 35,000 students.
California State University Long Beach is among the best universities in America. We're proud of our academic excellence. We're also very proud of our award-winning scholastic successes that we've had within each of our 8 academic colleges on campus. Our superb faculty members, assisted by our supportive staff, are facilitating higher learning at an exceptional level in all academic disciplines.
The university is close to the excitement of Los Angeles and Hollywood, but it's much less crowded and much more relaxed than Los Angeles because it's located in Long Beach.
Choosing a university, especially overseas, is not an easy job, so I did a lot of homework on finding this place, and it turned out to be one of the most amazing places ever.
The reason why I decided to settle in Cal State Long Beach is because the program is very well known, not only nationally but also internationally.
Cal State Long Beach is very safe for students. In fact, it's one of the top 3 safest campuses in the entire United States. It's easy for students to make new friends and to have lots of fun on campus or off campus while exploring the aquarium, the Queen Mary, the Shoreline Village, and the new Pike.
And Long Beach is the center of so many things. You have Universal close by, you have Disneyland close by. There's so many things around. It's a beautiful place to be in.
Cal State Long Beach is a terrific place for international students. The classes, the laboratories, the technology resources, and the housing facilities are excellent.
I loved the campus. So huge campus, so variety of programs. The people here, they are so nice. So it was like overwhelming.
Long Beach website looks so organized. So I thought, yeah, that school might be really good for me, so I chose that.
CSU Long Beach is one of the most popular colleges in Los Angeles area, so I definitely recommend this campus.
Outside of the classroom, the beach lifestyle along the coast is wonderful, and the weather is great year-round.
It doesn't really matter what time of the year it is because it's always beautiful and sunny.
There are 350 clubs and organizations for students. These clubs include sports, recreational, academic, cultural, and leisure time activities.
I was in accounting society and many other organizations, and through that I made a lot of friends.
Cal State Long Beach is a great place to obtain an academic degree in one of 87 bachelor's programs or 67 master's programs. It's also the best place for programs in English as a second language. And it's a fantastic place to earn course credit while studying abroad. Certainly, it's the best place to learn about life and culture in Southern California.
Our international students at Cal State Long Beach are very important to us. We take special care to help these students more easily make the transition to a new country, a new environment, and a completely different culture. Whether they are here for the American Language Institute programs, the study abroad programs, or the regular academic degree programs, the faculty and staff will ensure that the international students are fully engaged in learning as much as possible while making progress in their courses of study.
Cal State Long Beach is one of the most popular campuses in California. The quality of the academic programs and the excellent campus life make it the top place to study, learn, and live. We'd like to invite you to join us. Contact the website for more information on how to apply for admission.
Thank you. And that video was made in-house by our advanced media production, and the director, Dave Kelly, is in the audience. And you might have noticed that we chose students to give the testimony from different parts of the world. These are our real students on campus. I just don't know who that second guy was talking about the university, but he made a good sales speech. Anyway, before I go on to, all right, Microsoft. Before I go on to introduce the ambassador, as you saw, our president, King Alexander, who definitely would have been here, he sent me a note saying that he is in a meeting out of state. And our provost, Don Parra, is on vacation, taking some much-needed time off back to his roots in Michigan. But I would like to introduce some of the staff from the administration, higher administration at the university who are present here today. Mary Stephens, our Vice President for Administration and Finance, is here. Dr. David Dowell, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, who's also the Director of our Strategic Planning. Cecile Lindsay, Dr. Lindsay is Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, also Dean of the Graduate Studies. Omer Benley, Associate Dean of the College of Business Administration. And there are a number of staff from my college, here, Deans and Directors Group are also present at the university. Did I miss anyone? And also, I would like to welcome the members of the Nepali diaspora in the greater Los Angeles area who are well represented in here. Let me take a few moments to introduce His Excellency Dr. Sharma, who is the Ambassador of Nepal to the United States, who has extensive experience in government, international institutions, and economic research. He was Vice Chairman of the National Planning Commission in Nepal from 2002 to 2006. Before joining the National Planning Commission, which is, as Dr. Sharma was explaining earlier in the chamber meeting, that it has a different name, a little outdated name, but it is the highest planning commission who devises plan for the government of Nepal. Before joining the commission in 1997, he worked as a senior economic advisor at the Ministry of Finance, as a senior economist in the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore, and a fellow at the East-West Center in Hawaii. He was also a professor of economics in the Center for Economic Development and Administration at the Tribhuvan University, Nepal's national university and the largest one. In his long and distinguished career with the government of Nepal, Ambassador Sharma had extensive dealings with high-level, senior-level donor government officials, development agencies, NGOs, and the corporate sector in policy dialogue, foreign aid, peace building, and development of the country. Ambassador Sharma's other contributions include as a member with the World Energy Council Committee for Energy Issues of Developing Countries in London, and serving on the advisory panel of MDG assessment of the Asia-Pacific region, UNESCAP in Bangkok. He contributed towards an assessment of Asian least development countries in the context of Brussels LDC plans of action, and a report on global financial crisis and its implications to fiscal policy in Asia-Pacific region for UNESCAP. He has hands-on experience at the field level as an international consultant in Laos, in Bhutan, and India. He also worked as a consultant expert in a number of national and international agencies, including the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and UNDP. Dr. Sharma has published 8 books, including some edited ones, and have authored more than 50 articles on the economy, energy, and the environment of the Asia-Pacific region. For 7 years, Ambassador Sharma was also an editor to ASEAN Economic Bulletin and consultant editor to Hydrocarbon Asia, both published from Singapore. Interviews taken with him have appeared in the international newspapers and magazines, including Asia Week, International Herald Tribune, Straits Times, Business Times, Singapore and Malaysia both, New Straits Times, Bangkok Post, Forbes, Japan Times, and our own Los Angeles Times. And almost all of the newspapers and magazines published from Nepal. Dr. Sharma earned his PhD in economics from the University of Hawaii and is the immediate past president of the East-West Center Association of Nepal. Today, Ambassador Sharma is accompanied by his wife and daughter Silpa in the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand to His Excellency Ambassador Sharma. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi, for a very kind introduction. And then it's quite long, I guess. Although I worked in government and I was consultant in a number of organizations in my previous incarnation, but I think these days I'm working as an ambassador here and trying to concentrate on what I can achieve as an ambassador in Washington, D.C. in the United States. I'm also really impressed with the video that you have shown us. Hope I could apply, but this is this is very late for me. The reason I went to Hawaii a long time ago is that I applied in the, there is a Fulbright, East-West Center, and Hubert Humphrey. It's all managed by U.S. Educational Foundation in Nepal. I applied in Fulbright, but they selected me in the East-West Center, saying that because I was a science student, usually science students, they will have a higher percentage in their bachelor's and master's level. So they said, you have a higher percentage, you'll have a better chance of getting selected in the regional competition in Hawaii, because Fulbright is guaranteed. East-West Center, you have to again compete with the other countries. And then if you have a better score, higher score, then you'll have a better chance of getting selected. So that's how I got it. And then I got scholarship for full 5 years. So I think I was privileged to have that one. But anyway, that was a very impressive video, and campus is very impressive, huge. This is my first time to the California State University, Long Beach. And thank you very much for organizing this program. I'm really pleased, and this is my really honor and privilege to come here and speak about Nepal-US relation and economic opportunities in Nepal. Many of you probably know Nepal is the shape and size of Tennessee, but we have a big population, 29 million. In terms of diversity, there are more than 100 languages, and then statistics and census shows that there are more than 100 different languages in the country, many ethnic groups. But smaller groups. I think we don't have one dominating ethnic group in Nepal. So I think that is one advantage, but there are still issues being raised of the ethnicity and diversity in Nepal, sometimes for good and sometimes for the different political reasons. U.S.-Nepal relation, because I would like to be brief, and then probably we can have more dialogue and question answers at the end of the program. I don't want to go into details, but the Nepal's diplomatic relation with U.S. was done in 1947. I think it's a long time ago. And there is a second point about Nepal-U.S. relation is that Nepal is the first country where USAID established cooperation mission in the world. I think this is very significant. So we are celebrating, the USAID is celebrating 60th anniversary of its initiation of the program in Nepal. I think this is very significant. Peace Corps Volunteers program started immediately after the initiation of the Peace Corps program in the United States. That was started in Nepal in 1962. We benefited a lot out of the Peace Corps program. It was suspended in 2004 because of the security problem. Now it's being again in the process of resumption. Residential embassy in Washington, D.C. started in 1958. We have benefited a lot from U.S. assistance to Nepal. Talking about some of the high-level bilateral visits, I think there has been quite a few bilateral visits by high-level dignitaries from Nepal to the from Nepal, and also high-level dignitaries from the United States to Nepal, including Secretary Hillary Clinton, but when she was the First Lady a few years ago, and also the Colin Powell, Secretary of State, a long time ago. We are trying to see if we can bring some of the high-level people in Nepal, but now Nepal is in the process of finalizing the peace process, and we are trying to finalize the constitution, new constitution of Nepal. So I think we'll see what we can do. Now coming back to the linkages between Nepal and the United States, there are very strong linkages even today. Being far apart, United States and Nepal, now I think what time it is here, 5 o'clock, but it's 5 o'clock in the morning in Nepal, approximately. I don't know, maybe it's 4 or 6, whatever it is. So being so far apart, if we see the trade between Nepal and US, yes, everybody would like to export to the United States. Nepal's second export destination is still the United States, although it's a distant second from India, because our natural economic partner is India, because we have open border between India and Nepal. Nepal is situated between two large countries, Nepal, India and China, so we have some kind of natural economic relationship between India and Nepal. But after that, the second export destination has been the United States, although it has declined significantly. US used to take a share of about 25% of Nepal's export a few years ago until 2004-05, but it has declined to about 7.5% now because of the decline in garment exports from Nepal to US. The reason is the termination of multi-fiber agreement. Before that, we used to get duty-free, quota-free status in US. Now one has to compete to export to US. So Nepal being a landlocked country, I think it's probably we don't have the strong competitive advantage in the garment industry in the country. But anyway, I think still the number is quite impressive. In talking about the investment in Nepal, because we also would like to promote foreign investment in Nepal, US is among the top 3. Again, number 1 is India. US used to be number 2, but now China has taken over. But still, US is number 3 in the total investment in the country, foreign direct investment. The total investment is not that big. It's close to 200 to 250 million US dollar, but would like to see more investment coming from the United States to Nepal. Major export items to US, number 1 is handmade woolen carpets, Pashmina items. The Pashmina is just like Kashmir, but we have our brand name and we have our own one type of weaving, this Changra Pashmina. And also some garment as of now, but it has declined, nosedived in recent years. Silver jewelry and handicrafts and number of other things. I think there is again, I give example to the Nepalese community here that why don't you start importing from Nepal some of the essential items that is demanded by the Nepalese community and probably the South Asian communities. Some of the people in Baltimore and San Francisco, they have started doing that. They have been very successful. That's what I heard. I heard that the price is slightly at a higher level, but there is so much demand of these stuff that they have started, I think, making profit and started doing opening branches in other places. So I think that's how we can probably start, and there are a number of other opportunities for trade in the country. Tourism, US occupies the second position in Nepal in sending tourists in the country by year, because by land by year also India is the largest one. China, if we take by year and by land, still number 2. But if you take by year, India, after India it's US. It used to be United Kingdom until 2009, but US has taken over in 2010. Meaning that Nepal has become very popular to the US citizens in terms of the travel destination. I think this is very good. In 2010, about 33,200 Americans visited Nepal. CNN has listed Nepal as the best travel destination adventurous travel destination for 2011. So we are really very, very happy. And then because I have to talk with the government authorities here all the time, and then I give examples from all these numbers, saying that how popular Nepal is from the American perspective, and then everybody would like to go to Nepal. American assistance to Nepal is also increasing, despite the problems in the United States of debt problem, deficit problem. Nepal has been selected as a focus country in Feed the Future program of the present administration global health initiative and also the climate change. Because of some of these new programs, American assistance to Nepal is supposed to go up by almost 100% within 3 years' time. But we still have to see how much we'll get in 2012 because the President has already submitted the budget. We have seen significant increase for Nepal, but it again has to be revised, and then hopefully the Congress will not change on it, especially on Nepal. But there is a lot of things that will go between now and before passing this bill. As Dr. Joshi was mentioning, Nepal probably at this point of time, until last year it used to be 11th position, but now probably it's the 10th position in sending the students, foreign students in the United States. So but there is a lot of opportunity. Nepalese would like to come and study here. Despite low per capita income of Nepal, US has become one of the very attractive, I'll say the most attractive destination for higher education. So there is a lot of potential of bringing Nepalese students to the United States. So I think we have done very good in this area. What are some of the new initiatives that has been done between the United States and Nepal? Nepal has signed an agreement called Trade and Investment Framework Agreement between Nepal and US with the United States government. This is the first time Nepal has done any trade and investment agreement with the United States. So this means that there will be a permanent council of the officers comprising from Nepal and the United States, and this council will meet every year, at least once a year, and then identify the constraints and impediments in increasing the market access and increasing investment, especially in Nepal, and see how those impediments can be addressed at the government level. Similarly, we are trying to see if we can have a private sector business forum between Nepal and US so that this forum can provide the feedback to the council that has been made at the government level by the US government and Nepal. So this is very significant. And the second is we have been able to initiate and establish Nepal Congressional Caucus. This is also again first time in the history in the House, so that we can mobilize the political people at the political level. It has two major objectives: to strengthen the relationship between Nepal and the United States, and the second is to just send the voice of Nepali diaspora here in the United States through their representatives in the House and legislative body. So I'm encouraging all the Nepali diaspora community to have some kind of contact with their respective constituency, congressmen and other political leaders, so that their voices are heard and addressed to certain level at the political level. But that will also have very significant importance in strengthening the relationship between Nepal and US. It was registered officially in February 2011, and then we were able to, actually these two co-chairs were able to officially launch it on just last week, July 13th. There are about 10 congressmen. They signed as a member of the caucus. We would like to see more congressmen coming and joining the Nepal caucus in the future. As I mentioned before, the Peace Corps program was suspended in 2004 because of the security problem. In Nepal, we used to have a Maoist problem between 1996 and 2006, but after the agreement with the government, the Maoist party, they have participated in the peace process, participated in the election. So they are the part of the government now. They are part of the Constitutional Assembly, and then they have come to the mainstream. So this is the time we start initiating the trading activities, investment activities, and other activities in Nepal. So this is a good time. So we thought that this is also the time we can bring back the Peace Corps Volunteers program in Nepal. So it has been agreed that the Peace Corps Volunteer program will start the process. They have already started sending, they have actually already sent the assessment team in Nepal. The assessment team probably is already back here, so they will submit the report, and after submitting the report, it's a long process because they have to start the office in Nepal, initiate the program, allocate the budget, but anyway, the process has started. This is also something good that has been done over the last few months. U.S. Trade Mission has visited Nepal for the first time in 13 years. This time, I think what we thought is that the American investors who have invested in South Asia, especially India, will take them to Nepal. The reason is that they know the reason, they know what can be done in Nepal. So we encourage these people to go to Nepal. The American ambassador to Nepal visited India, encouraged these people to go to Nepal. So I think this has happened for the first time in 13 years. US is also leading the disaster risk reduction implementation strategy in Nepal. You know, I think Kathmandu is in a earthquake zone, seismic zone. California is also, I guess. But our housing system and monitoring system has not been very good. So there's a kind of prediction that if anything happens in Nepal, big scale earthquake, it will be a disaster in the country. So maybe we may not have that strong hospitals, open space, airports, and then what do we do? Because it's a mountain region. If the highways, we have the landslide and problem, what do we do next? So I think the US is taking the lead in this area. We are also doing number of tourism activities in the country. So I think in a nutshell, my feeling is that Nepal-US relation probably had never been this stronger before than what it is today, and then we need to make it more stronger in the future. The second aspect, when we talk about the economic opportunities in Nepal, Nepal is a very liberal country. In South Asia, actually, Sri Lanka started liberalizing the economy long time ago because Sri Lanka thinks that they will benefit out of liberalizing the economy. India started very late. Nepal started early 1990s. So we started market-oriented liberal economy long time ago, beginning of 1990s. That benefited a lot to the country. But again, I think we were having problems of the conflict, civil war, and then again we would like to see how we can accelerate the development activities of the country. Nepal's trade GDP ratio is about 47%. So it shows that it's quite open. Our tariff rate on an average is about 10%, which is again considered as one of the most liberal countries. No restrictions on ownership and repatriation of the investment as well as the dividend and the profit. Tax rates are quite low. It's in the service and manufacturing sector, it's only 20 to 25% range. At present, from 2006 to 2010, if we see the numbers, the private sector's capital formation or the investment as a percentage of GDP is in an increasing trend. Although we would like to see this one in the accelerated pace, but it has not been so, but it's in an increasing trend. We are also thinking that we can take benefits out of our strategic location. Nepal is situated between India and China. They are growing at a rate of India close to 10% and China double digit for the last several decades. And then population of 2.5 billion in the region. So I think Nepal can and should take the benefit out of it. That's also one of the advantages of the country. Nepal also enjoys the everything but arms relationship with the European communities, meaning that you can send anything to Europe except the arms in a concessional rate in the European communities, basically duty-free and quota-free. Nepal is also a member of what they call the Asian Trade Region, BIMSTEC, SAARC, as well as WTO. And all of these trade organizations, they have the objective of increasing the market access, promoting foreign direct investment, and also protecting intellectual property rights, providing technical assistance for countries like Nepal. So Nepal is a member of all these big committed trade organizations. In the area of let's say potential in the country investment, hydropower is one of the potential area in Nepal. I think many people know about that, but over the last 1.5 years, there has been some additional incentives provided in the hydropower sectors. That is 7 years of income tax holiday and 3 additional years of 50% tax reduction, income tax reduction. So similarly, value-added tax has been eliminated for some of the components of hydroelectricity development, and the power purchase agreement rate has been increased by about 20%. Similarly, Nepal has opened up 11 services sectors and 65 subsectors. It includes many services sectors for foreign investment, as for example, education, health, legal services, accounting services, banking services, a number of areas in the tourism area, but tourism area was open even before. So there are a whole lot of services sectors that have been opened up in Nepal for foreign direct investment. So this trade and investment framework agreement done between the government of Nepal and the government of US, they also will monitor what's being done, what can be done, how these constraints can be eliminated, and then we will have definitely the better institutional and organizational setup in promoting trade in the country. What are some of the other areas of trade that has been identified in a recent study between Nepal and US? Especially I'm talking about exports from Nepal to US medicinal herbs. I think we bring very little quantity of medicinal herbs in the United States from Nepal, but Nepal has a great potential. Silver jewelry already there, ginger, honey, tea, coffee, cardamom, essential oils, Pashmina is already there, engineering services, wool products, and products where the US government has provided the GSP facilities. Generalized system of preference facilities will provide duty-free, quota-free status for the products that has been identified by the US government. That has been grossly underutilized. So that's where probably we can work in the future. Lentils, handmade paper, iron and steel products, especially for other countries, not to US, and services exports. And I think these are some of the areas where we will have the strong potential, and that has been identified being done by a long analysis of the country. Manufacturing sector, some of the manufacturing sector, I identified that, but in general, Nepal being in the landlocked country, we have probably limited competitive advantage in the manufacturing sector. But my feeling is that Nepal government is also trying to see if we can develop the special economic zone in the Tarai region, in the inner Tarai region. And the special economic zone provides enough incentives to invest, not only for the final products in the manufacturing sector, but also for outsourcing the manufacturing parts and components. I think outsourcing is not only for services sector. These days, the outsourcing has also been very popular in the manufacturing sector. Asia and Pacific region, about 1/3 of the total trade is done in parts and components and not for the final products. I think this has been the trend worldwide. Worldwide, it has become a global village. So we definitely can take advantage of our low labor cost. And then I'll also say that now Nepalese laborers, they have become slightly skilled compared to what it used to be a long time ago or 20 years ago. And the region itself, India, China's multinational companies and growth rate. So I think we can probably take advantage of those areas. So hydropower, services sector, some manufacturing areas. I think these are some of the things probably we will have the potential for foreign investment, as well as I mentioned some of the products that can be brought from Nepal to the United States. Yes, I think we have some problems in the electricity area. These products that I mentioned before, these are the low energy intensive products which can be exploited, which can be promoted even in a low electricity supply time. But there are again some political issues left behind. That's the completion of the peace process and completion of the new constitution in Nepal. We would like to see more investment and trading relationship, people-to-people relation being stronger in the future between Nepal and US, in whether we talk about the education sector, tourism sector, or the other promotional activities that is being done by the American NGOs in Nepal. And not only American NGOs, a lot of diaspora community and individual people. We get many emails from the embassy, that we would like to do something in Nepal. Where do you suggest? Where do you think we can go? So I think there are many inquiries coming from the American philanthropic organizations. And then I was attending one of the conferences a few years ago in Europe. The assistance coming from the philanthropic organizations, non-government organizations in the future, and probably it's true even today, I have not seen the number, will be much higher compared to what the government will provide as the assistance to the other countries and other governments. So I think there is so much of potential in US to exploit non-governmental organizations and philanthropic organizations for the benefit of Nepal in different areas, whether that's poverty reduction or the development activities in the country. So I think I touched upon on different areas of Nepal-US relationship, some issues about the exports, investment, tourism areas where we can have, and the services sector where we can have future linkages and investment, trading relationship, and also touched upon some of the other various areas where we can have some stronger benefits between Nepal and US. I also give emphasis on people-to-people relationship between Nepal and US. There are enormous number of tourists not only going to Nepal, but when they come back, many of these tourists, they would like to go back again to Nepal. I think Nepal has that attraction, and we have seen these Peace Corps volunteers who have returned back from Nepal to US, still continuing their activities, development activities in Nepal, whether that's in the education sector or doing some business in the country, taking people from the United States to Nepal as a tour guide or tour operator. So I think many of these people are involved in Nepal's development work. I always say that not only the Nepali diaspora communities are the goodwill ambassador forever, for life, but also these Peace Corps volunteers or many people who have worked in Nepal have come back to the United States. They have become and they have acted like the goodwill ambassador for Nepal all the time for life. So I think that has been very good for the country, because the assistance program, trade and this and that, probably we are talking about real-time statistics. But if you are talking about people-to-people relationship, that's enormous, and then that's for the life. I think we are also trying to see how we can develop those kind of activities. I think maybe I'll stop here, and then maybe we can open up for the question and answer. But in the meantime, I would like to wish the College of Continuing and Professional Education all the best, because you are celebrating 40th anniversary. You have done excellent work. That's what I heard. And all the best to you too. Thank you.
We have a few more minutes for some Q&A. Any questions from the audience? Please, Excellency.
I'd like to know what kind of resources do our embassy in Nepal in Washington have to help people like us who are trying to promote trade between Nepal and United States. I went to Nepal recently. I met a lot of people, businessmen, who are interested in selling their products over here.
Mm-hmm.
And my challenge is more on this side, finding the suitable partners here, working relationship, working partners here. Can we get any help from the embassy in that respect? Also, bringing, like you said, investments from the United States to Nepal. We're working on that too. So, but my problem mainly is to try to find the resources here. Who do we contact? Where do we go to find people who are interested in buying these products? Can you help us with that?
I think we are trying to do two things. One is trying to spread out the message. I think what are some of the recent developments that has been done in Nepal, how we can facilitate, how we can provide the linkages to the respective ministries and the contact people in the government of Nepal. I think that's our main responsibility, and we'll do that. The second is we are also trying to see if we can make a directory of the people and the agencies who are interested in some kind of investment and link up with the Nepalese business communities. This is not that easy because in US there are millions of companies anyway, and then how to find them out, how to prioritize, I think it's a difficult work. But it's a building block process, and we have started compiling the directory of some of the agencies and the people who have already started working or who will work, who has the potential to work in Nepal. But it's not that easy. I don't think I will commit on that and then say that we'll complete that one soon. But I think the best way to go about, I think that's my personal experience over the last 1.5 years, the best way to contact the association of these agencies. If we are talking about hydropower investment in Nepal, there's a hydropower association, one of the offices in Washington, D.C. If you go in contact with these people, they will circulate your idea or request to their members all over the United States and probably even beyond. And if there are some people who are interested to talk to you, definitely they will come to you. And if there are any people who are working in Nepal, South Asia, they will give you the contact. I think I found that one very useful. Otherwise, in this big country, where do you go and how do you find it out? I think that's one of the best options probably you can utilize, the associations. And then taking part of their, taking interest and attending some of their conferences will also be extremely useful. I think that will develop the network. There's a White House initiative for Asians and Pacific Islanders. I think I get an email almost every week. They are involved in one or another kind of program. What kind of facilities the Asians can get, being the minority in the country? What are some of the incentives? And there are a whole lot of things that we are not aware of that, but they can provide the information. So I think that's what probably I'll suggest. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for coming from Washington, D.C. to share with us and for being here. My question is, as you said, that Nepal population has grown from when I left Nepal was 20 million, now it's 30 million. Population is growing, but resources, especially food, is shortage. And what do you think about in the future, shortage of food? And I think that Nepal still is a the agriculture country. 80% people are farming, and I find sometimes I see in the news that they have the main shortage of fertilizer. So what do you think about the scope of exporting fertilizer from the United States to Nepal, and what is the triangular relation between India, Nepal, and US, in terms of fertilizer and agricultural products?
I don't know the potential and the cost because it could be very costly, because even if you are exporting fertilizer to Nepal, I don't think you'll probably export it from US. What you do is you buy in Indonesia, you buy in some of the energy intensive countries where they produce a lot of fertilizer, and then export to Nepal. I think that's what I have seen people doing. The population growth rate, yes, in the previous years it was quite high, but now the fertility rate has declined. Migration from other places like India, I don't think there is any significant migration these days now. So the real growth rate we have to see, because we have done the census just last month, We have to see the new numbers, but my feeling is that, and then if we go by the trend, the fertility rate and the population growth rate has come down. Now, the food perspective, we still can exploit a lot of areas in agriculture. And high-value crops, the agriculture growth rate has been about 6% in Nepal. When we talk about high-value crops, this is tea, coffee, cardamom, vegetables, off-season vegetables. They are doing great because we have increased access of road transport in Nepal, increased urbanization in Nepal, not only in Nepal, but across the border in India. So they are all doing good. I think despite the lack of government's initiative in these areas, or not enough initiative in these areas. But the main problem is in the crop in Nepal. The productivity of the major crops, rice, corn, wheat, low. I think it's very low. And the one major difference in the productivity between Nepal and India, Bangladesh and Nepal is water. If we are talking and doing the factor analysis, if we can irrigate the land, especially in the Tarai area, we can easily have 4 to 5% growth rate in agriculture in a sustainable manner. So I think that is one of the areas where probably we need to focus on. But there are some problems doing irrigation in Tarai region. First of all, the cost. The second is anything that you do lower riparian, upper riparian about the water, I think you have to have the consultation with India also. So I think we need to have stronger cooperation between India and Nepal in this area. Food shortage and food unavailability, I think if the country has the purchasing power, I think that's also the definition of food security from Food and Agriculture Organization. Meaning that either you have to have plenty of food that is grown by yourself, because your neighbors will not give you free, or you have to have the adequate income to purchase the food. So I think it's basically related with your capacity to buy the food or to grow the food by yourself. So I think if we can increase the GDP growth rate, whether that's through tourism development, hydropower development, manufacturing sector, or a little bit of growth of agriculture, they will all contribute in securing food security at the household level and the country. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you for coming all the way from Washington, D.C. His Excellency Dr. Sharma. This is regarding American and Nepal relationship. Every time people go to take visa, and we are having trouble, students, visitors, kids should participate, and their parents to come over here. And can you do something about it?
I think I am responsible for providing visa to the Americans going to Nepal. That I can assure it will be done within one day. Very efficient and very effective. The other part is a very complex part. That is up to the American ambassador or the American State Department, American government's responsibility. But the thing is that, as Dr. Joshi was mentioning, if we see the number of students in the US, it is second to India from South Asia. I think which is very generous, I'll say. If we talk even globally, Nepal occupies 10th position. In terms of population, Nepal is doesn't have the 10th ranking in the population. So I think for the students, yes, I think there will be denial, there will be problems, but they also have some criteria, who can come and who cannot, who has the potential. But in general, if we see the number, I think this is quite generous. If you come to Washington, D.C., I think every day there will be some new people coming and visiting our embassy. So I think there is a flood of Nepalese people coming to Washington, D.C. and the United States. But you are right. In some cases, I think even if their children are getting married, they don't get the visa. If there are other occasions like attending the graduation, I figured out from some of the people who are working in the consular section, American embassy, I think what could be the potential. We don't go by case, but for many cases, I won't say for all the cases, for many cases, there is some justification. But we don't know the details, and we are also not responsible for that. We also say to the American ambassador to Nepal, please be considerate in many of these cases. And if there are any emergency and serious problems, we also recommend from our embassy to the American embassy, and they have heard that. They are very positive on that. Thank you.
Maybe one
I think
last question.
no, there is one there, and yeah, there's a lady there. And
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Please.
so.
Go ahead and then I'll
Yeah,
take
okay.
two more then.
Okay.
I have one more.
Actually, this is a question from a student who couldn't be here this evening. He's interested in starting a student group on campus who would be doing micro-lending. And he's asking about the potential of Nepal and if you have an opinion about micro-lending.
I'll say mixed in the sense that we have so much of potential in Nepal because the access to loan is, I think, very rare to the people who are working in the village areas. So from that perspective, yes, I think we have so much of potential for micro-lending, microcredit in Nepal. The second is the overhead cost of micro-lending is quite high. Let's say if you really want to go by the market, my feeling is that the interest rate should be anything between 20 to 25%. It's very high compared to the commercial banks. The reason is that in the commercial banks, you give loan in millions. In these places, you give in hundreds. Then I think the collecting the loan back, collecting the interest, traveling to those places will be very expensive. So if there is any foundation, any organization supporting for the overhead cost, and many of the organizations, they do that for the benefit of the people in the rural areas for a certain period of time. And we have plenty of those programs in Nepal. Even Asian Development Bank does that. So if there is any support from any organizations in reducing or in providing some of the overhead costs, it will be much easier, much more beneficial to the rural people of Nepal. But if it is on her own or on his own, I think it is the interest rate has to be very, very high, and then maybe not feasible to a large extent. Yeah, thank you. Last one. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Your Excellency. Let me introduce myself first.
Okay.
I work at California State University, Fullerton, which is another equally largest institution under California State University system. Sometimes we are larger, sometimes.
Okay. Now I know that.
Yeah, I want to change the topic now. We have a pride that we are top 10 nation in the world to send our students to US. We have pride in that, it looks like. And being yourself as an academician back in the country and in your research life, I think it's very important for us to think of academic ties between two countries. During your tenure, do you have any priorities to think in that area also other than the economic ties?
Yes, I think the thing is that whenever there is any request, especially from the American universities, to send either some students or the faculty members in Nepal, I have helped them actually, and it has worked out. It has worked out well. If we are talking about bringing Nepalese faculty members to this place, I think there is some demand from various people, but I have not seen any serious emails coming from Nepal. But that's difficult. It's not that easy either, because probably I can send these letters to some of the people whom I know, but there are processes, there are fellowships, there are so many things available in this country. I think I would like to give you one example. I was in Hawaii, but one fine morning I thought that if I go back to Nepal without going to the mainland US, people will ask me, have you been to New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles? I could say no, no, and no. So I went to the library. At that time, there was no Google facility or internet facilities to find out what is where. And then I went to the library and find out that who will provide me the summer scholarship so that I can go to the mainland free of cost. So fortunately, I found out one in Michigan University, Ann Arbor, University of Michigan. So they provided me 2 months of full payment housing, tuition, airfare, and everything. And then in addition, I was getting the stipend from the East-West Center. So actually, during the summertime, I was paid 2 times. So I spent 2 months in the university there. I got 1 additional certificate the summertime. In the meantime, I came to the Long Beach during that period, my first visit, a number of these places. And she applied. She's the head of the Siddhartha Art Gallery. This is a very prestigious scholarship. You don't come here only once. They will invite you 3 times in consecutive 3 years for summertime. Summer of 2011, summer of 2012, and summer of 2010. So she was able to get that fellowship program. US, you know that better than I do, is a land of opportunities. If you go, Google, try in different places, you still can come. I think I can guarantee that one. But there are other opportunities like linking some of the universities here with some of the programs in Nepal's university. Through one university, there are some problems of governance. I know that, and you know that. Anything that is done between any university here and Kathmandu University has worked out very well. So if you have any suggestions, let me know. I think I can explore. Thank you. Yeah.
अब आयो वहाँ जान्छ रेस्टुरेन्ट जान्छ